Der ukrainische Präsident Wladimir Selenskyj hat bei der offiziellen Verkündung seines Siegesplans dem Westen quasi ein Ultimatum gestellt. Entweder Atomwaffen für die Ukraine oder ein NATO-Beitritt. Anders lasse sich Russland nicht besiegen. Hältst du eine von diesen Optionen für realisierbar? Wird sich die NATO darauf einlassen?
Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, ever. And Ukraine will never have nuclear weapons, ever. Zelensky has pretty much acknowledged the latter part because shortly after he made his ridiculous ultimatum, he was told in no uncertain terms that is grossly irresponsible, and he has since then come out several times to apologize and say, of course, Ukraine will never have nuclear weapons. Of course, we are respectful of this. Of course. But he did that because people said, if that's the path you want to take, you'll never get another penny from us. This is the reality. Ukraine is a defeated nation. Zelensky's path to victory isn't a path to victory. It's a path to a negotiated peace that is built around the pretense that Ukraine has a say in its future. Ukraine has no say in its future. Ukraine under Zelensky is a defeated nation that will never be treated as an equal by Russia. Russia will, part of the denazification processes that are a prerequisite for the cessation of hostilities will require Ukraine to redefine its governing bodies. The presidency will no longer be filled by somebody named Zelensky. The Banderists who have infiltrated the Ukrainian government will no longer be in power. Their political parties will be disbanded. Their membership will be arrested or scattered into the winds. This is the reality. Zelensky is dead man walking. He's dead politically. He has no future, and who knows what his physical health will be going forward. But the fact is, Ukraine will be hard-pressed to survive this winter, and Zelensky knows it. So he's trying in a panic to put pressure across the board to get some sort of concessions in place that, in his fantasy-based world, would somehow compel Russia to cut him a favorable deal. I can't speak on behalf of the Russians, but my understanding, based upon listening to the words of the Russian leadership, is that Russia is not inclined to cut Ukraine a deal. Russia is inclined to win this war on terms acceptable to Russia and only to Russia.
Frankreich hat als eine Art Kompromiss vorgeschlagen, die Ukraine könnte einen Abschreckungsschirm mit konventionellen Langstreckenraketen erhalten. Der französische Außenminister Sébastien Lecornu spricht von einem umfassenden, nicht-nuklearen strategischen Abschreckungspaket. Damit solle Russland entweder zur Teilnahme an echten Friedensverhandlungen gezwungen werden oder die Zerstörung seiner militärischen Ziele erleiden. Wie siehst du diese Option? Könnte die NATO so ein Abschreckungspotenzial in der Ukraine errichten?
There's a third option, or Russia destroys NATO, which would be the option that would be taken. NATO would become an active participant in the conflict, and Russia would take the appropriate military means to counter that. NATO is not ready for a war with Russia. While Russia does not want a war with NATO, if that's the direction NATO wants to go, Russia is prepared to do this. That's the reality. At the moment, the Biden administration recognizes this is reality. This is why they haven't signed off on authorizing this. This is, the French are all over the map, but they don't have a policy. They're looking for relevance. Who knows why they're saying what they're saying? But as I said, the first two options just aren't. Ukraine will not win. It's impossible for you. Let's just put it this way. Russia is a nuclear power. How do you defeat a nuclear power without that power using its nuclear weapons? So let's stop talking about the pretense of Ukraine, a destroyed nation, defeating Russia. It will never happen. If NATO thinks that it can somehow facilitate strategic deep attacks inside Russia that would resonate politically, meaning they bring harm to Russia, and not believe that Russia would counterattack against those responsible, then this is pure fantasy, and irresponsible and dangerous fantasy. The fact of the matter is, if NATO wants to get involved in this war, then there will be a Russian retaliation, and it will inevitably lead to nuclear exchange, and then we have a general nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States, and we all die. That's what the French are saying. So anybody listening to the French what they're saying is, we want you to swallow this suicide pill, because the French policy will only lead to a nuclear war between Russia and the collective West.
Der russische Präsident Wladimir Putin betonte vergangene Woche, dass ein Friedensschluss in der Ukraine für Russland nur dann Sinn hätte, wenn es tatsächlich ein dauerhafter und stabiler Frieden sei. Er sprach sich gegen einen Waffenstillstand aus für eine Woche, 2 Wochen oder ein Jahr, damit die NATO-Länder die Ukraine aufrüsten und sie mit neuer Munition versorgen können. Wie soll denn der von Putin geforderte langfristige, nachhaltige und dauerhafte Frieden erreicht werden? Würde jeder Waffenstillstand von der NATO ausgenutzt werden, um die Ukraine wieder hochzurüsten und sie womöglich umgehend in die NATO aufzunehmen? Wie will Russland das verhindern?
Well, first of all, let's understand that Russia will never trust the West again after the betrayal that took place by Germany and France over the Minsk Accords, where we both had both the French president and the German chancellor admit that the Minsk Accords, which is designed to bring an end to the fighting in Ukraine, were simply a facade used by Ukraine and the West to buy time to rebuild the Ukrainian army so that they can continue the conflict. Russia has learned its lesson, so there will never again be a ceasefire, ever. That's the first thing. Also, the Russians will never accept an interim agreement like the Minsk Accords. When this war ends, it will be because Russia will dictate the terms. These terms will be manifested in treaty-like documents that will be signed by Ukraine, and to the extent that there's going to be international involvement in this, then they would be signed by the other parties. And this means that, the other parties would lift all sanctions. If you want to sign an agreement with Russia, you're going to have to lift all the sanctions. You're going to have to recognize that the territory that Russia calls Russia is Russian territory forever, and you lose all claim on it. Ukraine will be permanently neutral. There will never be NATO membership. Things of this nature. This is how the war ends. Russia will dictate those terms, and the West will accept it. That's how this war ends. There will not be a ceasefire. There will not be some sort of, because Russia is 100% right. The ceasefire would immediately be used by the West to rebuild the Ukrainian military capability, economic capability, and entrench the political system of Ukraine, and maybe even allow for some sort of interim NATO membership type arrangement to be made that would then be used to legitimize some sort of long-term Korean War, Cold War type demilitarized zone. That's just not going to happen. When this war ends, it's going to end with the unconditional surrender of Ukraine and the unconditional acceptance of the terms of the surrender by the West. That's what happens when you lose a war, by the way. Just there are consequences to losing a war, and NATO gambled, went all in. They've lost, and so sad, too bad.
Vor einigen Wochen sprachst du davon, dass Russland sich in der Kriegsführung zurückhält bis zum Brics-Gipfel. Dieser fand nun diese Woche statt. Rechnest du mit einer Intensivierung der russischen Offensive in den kommenden Wochen, oder wird sich Russland weiter zurückhalten hinsichtlich der US-Präsidentschaftswahl in 2 Wochen? Welche Wirkung hätte ein rapider russischer Vorstoß auf den Wahlkampf in den USA?
Well, first of all, the Russians have been very careful to disassociate outside political factors to the war. They say the war has its own objectives and the war operates on its own timelines. But it goes without saying that given the resonance of the Ukraine conflict on the international stage, that you wouldn't, if you were Russia, wouldn't want to do anything in Ukraine that distracted from the consensus you're trying to build in Kazan. The vast majority of the world, while they aren't going to openly endorse Russia's military action in Ukraine, are with Russia economically and politically. And, and Russia needs to exploit this. What you don't want to do is create a crisis that didn't need to be created right now, and that could be used by the opponents of BRICS to drive a wedge between Russia and various nations. For instance, it's very much in the interest of Russia to have Prime Minister Modi, the Indian leader, arrive in Kazan. My understanding, he has arrived. But if there was a Ukraine crisis taking place, Modi might not feel comfortable flying. And if Modi didn't go, then maybe Xi Jinping wouldn't come. And now you suddenly have a problem. Um, Russia wants to make sure that everybody who comes doesn't feel that they're going to suffer, um, political damage on the world stage by arriving in Russia. And so you protect them by not undertaking, um, a game-changing course of action in Ukraine. But on the other hand, you have to keep the pressure on the Ukrainians. You have to keep moving forward. They're off balance. You can't allow them to buy time to regain balance. So Russia will continue to put the pressure that they are right now on Ukraine. Once BRICS is over, look, Russia wants this war to end just like everybody else, but they want it to end on their terms. And the way you do that is to get Ukraine to surrender unconditionally. And the way you do that is to cause their military to collapse. The Ukrainian military is on the verge of collapse. In fact, some say they are collapsing right now. And I think the Russians will be seeking to sustain the military pressure throughout the winter. There won't be a winter pause. The Russians will continue the attacks, not just against the Ukrainian military, but against the Ukrainian economy. And you'll see additional attacks designed to strangle Ukraine so that this winter, the Ukrainians will not only economically collapse, but socially collapse and politically collapse, thereby eliminating, the foundation upon which continued military resistance is possible. So that's what I think is going to happen is after Kazan, I think you're going to see the Russians begin a series of new offensive operations on the ground, backed by the air, that are designed to destroy Ukraine's ability to continue this war.
US-Präsident Joe Biden war vergangenes Wochenende in Deutschland. Die deutsche Politelite huldigte ihm bei seiner Abschiedstour. Bundeskanzler Olaf Scholz dankte Biden persönlich. Das Bündnis mit seinen USA habe Deutschland stark gemacht. Bundespräsident Frank-Walter Steinmeier verlieh Biden mit dem Bundesverdienstkreuz die höchste deutsche Auszeichnung. Steinmeier drückte aus, jeder Deutsche würde das strahlende Licht Joe Bidens verehren und er sei ein Leuchtfeuer der Demokratie. Wie wirken diese Worte auf dich als kritischen US-Journalisten? Ist Biden ein Leuchtfeuer der Demokratie? Was drücken diese Worte der deutschen Staatsführung aus?
Well, I think there's two questions in here. One is America the beacon of democracy that Germany says it is? And the other one is Germany capable of understanding what a beacon of democracy is? I mean, if Germany was, in fact, the gold standard of democracy in the world today, then the praise coming from Germany would be high praise. And the medal that was pinned on Biden's chest would be a medal that, was deserving of admiration on the part of the world. But Germany is a failed democracy, a failing democracy. Let's look at their foreign minister, Baerbock, who said that she doesn't care what the German people think. She's going to support Ukraine no matter what. That's the kind of democratic statements we like to hear from politicians. No, this is just the theater of the absurd. This is the equivalent of, the Ku Klux Klan in the United States meeting amongst themselves and handing out civil rights awards, saying, you're such a good civil rights leader, you're a beacon of civil rights, etc. No, you're a racist organization. Germany and the United States are not beacons of democracy. We're the antithesis of that. Look at the level of suppression of free speech in Germany. Look at the level of suppression of free speech in the United States. How can you consider yourself to be the beacons of democracy when you suppress the ability of the people to challenge the policies of the government, especially when those policies need to be challenged? So no, this is absurd. Joe Biden has damaged American democracy. Germany is just floundering. The pathetic performance of Olaf Scholz as their prime minister and his entire cabinet is manifest for all to see. Now, that just because the Scholz government and the Biden government, don't function in a manner which conforms to the highest standards and ideals of democracy doesn't mean that democracy doesn't exist. As we've seen in Germany, when regions hold elections, the will of the people is manifesting itself in a way that's detrimental to Olaf Scholz and his coalition. And we're going to have an election here in the United States in less than 20 days, in which the Biden presidency, the Biden model, the Biden notion of democracy is going to be directly challenged by Donald Trump. And if Trump wins, one can say that, maybe there's hope for democracy in America because we voted out, that which is inherently undemocratic. But that doesn't mean that the promise of Trump to be a new era of democratic appeal in America will likewise manifest itself. Donald Trump has autocratic tendencies and has indicated that he may do things that don't necessarily conform with the with what one normally views American democracy to be. Politicization of the judicial branch to rein in his opponents. It's something that's been done to him, and he has threatened retribution, and that's not really democracy. So I think both Germany and America are fundamentally damaged when it comes to, what constitutes, democracy in the modern era. And handing out awards to each other and shaking each other's hands and calling each other nice names it's just theater. It's not reality.
Deutschland und Großbritannien unterzeichnen ein neues bilaterales Militärabkommen. Damit soll insbesondere die Geschlossenheit gegenüber Russland bekundet werden. Die britische Zeitung The Times schreibt, der Pakt soll es den britischen und deutschen Streitkräften ermöglichen, gemeinsame Militärübungen an der Ostgrenze der NATO zu Russland durchzuführen, höchstwahrscheinlich in Estland und Litauen. Welche Bedeutung hat dieses deutsch-britische Militärabkommen? Hat es tatsächlich eine abschreckende Wirkung gegenüber Russland?
Well, let's look at this. Germany had taken the lead for one of the NATO battle groups in Lithuania. There was a reinforced battalion-sized battle group that had a German a battalion's worth of forces attached. So Germany has since then said they're going to expand this to be a brigade. And yet the question is, can Germany do this? My understanding is that the Germans have to recruit specifically for overseas assignments, that you can't order a German who can't order that person to be based, outside of Germany, that these have to be volunteers. So the first question is, can Germany find enough volunteers for this brigade? And then can they equip this brigade? Because the brigade is going to require, new consignments of equipment. The German industrial base, military industrial base, produce the equipment necessary to make this brigade function? So right off the bat, we see that Germany has a problem getting a brigade. Now, for instance, let's look at the kind of fighting that might take place with Russia. In 2023, the Ukrainians did their vaunted counteroffensive, the summer counteroffensive, and it required conceptually 12 brigades to pull this off, and they failed. Now we're talking about one German brigade. Now I know the Germans like to think of themselves as the supermen, and they're the Aryan race, and they are superior to everybody else. And so maybe they think one German brigade is the equivalent of 12 Ukrainian brigades. I don't know what's going through their mind, but they're not the Aryan race. They don't know how to fight. They haven't fought in a war in a long time. They have no clue what war is. They don't know how to sustain it logistically. And as I said, they don't even know how to recruit people to go into this brigade in Lithuania. And once they start having bodies come home in body bags, I just wonder how enthusiastic people will be about continuing that little exercise. So the German component of this of this British-German military relationship is suspect. Now let's get to the Brits. What are they going to deploy to Lithuania? The Brits can't even get a brigade together. They don't have the military capacity to get an armored brigade together. If you put all of the British Army into a major soccer stadium in England, you will still have, 20,000 unsold seats. And that's all of the British Army. That's the cooks, the bakers, the candlestick makers, not just fighters. when you get down to actually trigger pullers, people who pull the trigger, infantrymen, people in the tanks, the size of the British military is pathetically small. And the Brits don't have the equipment to pull this off. They can't generate an armored brigade capable of functioning as a brigade. So what are the Brits going to contribute to this Baltic force? A battalion, maybe 2 battalions, and that's it. That's it. So do you think the Russians are losing any sleep over a non-existent German brigade and a British army that can't even assemble a brigade, knowing that to have any impact against Russia in a way, you're going to have to assemble, a dozen or 20 brigades to be militarily viable? So let's stop talking about the Germans and the Brits as if they're some sort of military superpowers. They're not. They're jokes. They're pathetic. They're nothing. And until they can demonstrate the ability to generate the appropriate force, I don't think we should give them airtime. Look, Germany had a hard time. Pistorius was talking about an expansion in the German budget. The German parliament, in the military budget, the size of the expansion doesn't cover the cost of inflation, which means that the German military is going to continue to shrink, not grow. So a shrinking German military is supposed to strike fear in the hearts of the Russians when they talk about joining forces with a shrinking British military to join up in the Baltics, which means that the Germans and the Brits are going to be relying upon the Baltics to provide the host nation forces, and none of the Baltic militaries have any viability or credibility in terms of being military powers. So this is a phantom army. It exists in the minds of these of the people that are putting together this narrative, but there's nothing real about this capability. It's a joke.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.